One of the biggest Pentecostal denominations in the world is having its foundation rocked by breaking news. Moses Tyson is the target of a significant lawsuit brought by Bishop J. Drew Sheard and the Church of God in Christ, with potentially devastating repercussions for the whole religious community. Decades of tension, unspoken conflicts, and accusations are finally being revealed. Furthermore, what you're going to hear might fundamentally alter your perspective on COGIC's leadership and legacy. You won't believe the disputes that go place behind the scenes, the court cases, and the long-buried secrets. This is where courtroom drama and the spiritual realm collide, and things are going to get heated. One of the most significant Pentecostal groups in the globe for a long time has been the Church of God in Christ, or COGIC. However, behind the public persona, the conferences and the sermons, there are stories that hardly ever make the news. Among the most combustible of these stories is the court dispute between Bishop J. Drew Sheard and Moses Tyson, which has shaken the church and the religious community at large. We're delving deeply into a controversy today that has spent years mostly behind closed doors. This is a tale of power battles, enduring disagreements, and legal wrangling that has the potential to permanently alter COGIC's leadership dynamics. You won't believe the potential effects this case may have on the church's reputation, the private disputes, and the accusations that have now come to light. We'll take you through the background, the major figures, and the conflicts that have accumulated over the years. This narrative reveals the inner workings of a Catholic institution where faith, authority, and legacy collide, from boardroom disputes to legal filings. And believe me when I say that the next part is the most astonishing. No one anticipated the fight. We must first examine the history of the Church of God in Christ in order to comprehend the scope of this legal dispute. With millions of followers worldwide, COGIC, which was founded in the late 19th century, is now one of the biggest Pentecostal churches in the world. Beyond the pulpit, it has an impact on social movements, politics, education, and music within the African American community. Leadership is more than a title in this influential organization. It's a duty steeped in tradition, influence, and spiritual authority. Bishop J. Drew Sheard and other leaders have led congregations, shaped policy, and acted as role models for millions of followers over the course of decades in ministry. However, influence can also lead to conflict, just like in any big organization. As a longtime member of the denomination, Moses Tyson is familiar with the complex leadership structure of COGIC. He has been involved behind the scenes for decades, exerting influence that has influenced top-level choices. Even while his achievements were frequently praised, there have been allegations that his behavior occasionally caused controversy and strained relations with other leaders. Disagreements over governance, decision-making, and how to interpret church policy were the seeds of the current conflict years ago. These conflicts may appear to be ordinary organizational problems at first glance, but they have far more significance within a religious organization than just administrative issues. They discuss authority, heritage, and the church's own future. The fact that a large portion of this stress was concealed from the public made things worse. Members observed harmony, cooperation, and a common spiritual purpose. However, the relationships were much more complex behind the scenes, with tense moments, calculated moves, and brewing disputes. These covert relationships prepared the ground for what would ultimately turn into a significant legal dispute. A sequence of events transpired that would push decades of animosity into the public eye, just when it appeared that these disputes could stay internal. What specifically led to the lawsuit? What accusations are being made? And how would this upset COGIC's core principles? The following chapter starts there. Furthermore, the story takes a turn for the worse than anyone could have predicted. In a company with the historical and spiritual significance of COGIC, the road to litigation is rarely simple. The disagreements between Bishop J. Drew Sheard and Moses Tyson that ultimately resulted in legal action did not start out that way. They were the result of decades of developing relationships, power battles, and divergent ideas about the future of the church. Moses Tyson's strategic impact within COGIC has long long been acknowledged. He frequently worked behind the scenes on important choices and was trusted by many for his leadership expertise and organizational skills. However, individuals familiar with the matter claim that his methods periodically ran counter to the viewpoints of other leaders, resulting in conflict over authority, the application of policies, and the denomination's course. Bishop J. Conversely, Drew Sheard has established himself as a dynamic and progressive leader, devoted to maintaining the church's operational integrity and the congregation's spiritual development. His approach to leadership places a strong emphasis on openness, responsibility, and prudent use of church funds. Tensions increased, however, when Tyson's influence seemed to clash with Sheard's goals. The conflicts covered a wide range of topics: financial supervision, key post appointments, governance processes, and policy interpretations inside the church. These may seem like COGIC administrative disputes, but they have a lot of significance. Leadership choices have an impact on congregational trust, the church's reputation, and even the spiritual direction provided to millions of members, in addition to organizational effectiveness. Alleged personal disputes that extended beyond formal church concerns fueled the flames. Insiders claim that there were instances of alleged manipulation where it was difficult to distinguish between institutional obligation and individual ambition. High-stakes negotiations with emotional and spiritual ramifications were what onlookers perceived as ordinary interior conversations. These disputes smoldered for years, frequently discussed in private but never entirely settled. According to reports, attempts at internal resolution and mediation failed, leading to a tense atmosphere. When crucial decisions affecting church governance and leadership positions were made, the urgency increased, and Sheridan and his legal team took the extraordinary step of bringing a significant lawsuit against Tyson and potentially other people involved. This legal action is more than simply a formality. It is the result of decades of hostility, distrust, and unsolved issues. It highlights the difficulties of striking a balance between faith and responsibility, the weight of authority, and the complex dynamics of spiritual leadership. What is the complaint alleging, though? What are the assertions? What possible repercussions might this have for Moses Tyson and Bishop Sheard? More significantly, what effect will this lawsuit have on the future of one of the world's most powerful churches? The stunning and incredibly illuminating answers to these questions lay the groundwork for the following chapter, which will focus on the court battle and its ramifications. The religious community was taken aback when the case was formally filed. Conflicts within the Church of God in Christ had been resolved through internal channels and church councils for many years. However, the dispute between Moses Tyson and Bishop J. Drew Sheard was no longer merely an internal one. Under the scrutiny of the media and the law, it had overflowed into the public sphere. Claims pertaining to leadership accountability, financial oversight, and governance are at the center of the case. Although the whole court documents are lengthy, the main allegations allegedly center on abuses of power, transgressions of church governance regulations, and acts that Bishop Sheard and his legal team contend have compromised the integrity of the denomination. To put it another way, this is more than a personality conflict. It is a conflict over the fundamental ideas that underpin one of the biggest Pentecostal organizations on the planet. Insiders claim that Moses Tyson has long been recognized for his power behind the scenes. Over the years, he is credited by many with helping to shape COGIC's organizational structure and growth. However, the lawsuit claims that some of those activities might have gone too far, resulting in circumstances that potentially jeopardized accountability and openness. If verified, these allegations might have significant ramifications for Tyson as well as the denomination's whole governance paradigm. The stakes are really high. The reputations of all parties involved are at risk, in addition to possible legal repercussions. Members of the community, clergy, and congregations are intently observing as they attempt to make sense of the horrific accusations currently in the public eye, while also balancing the spiritual advice they have received. There are many questions. How long could such tensions go unnoticed? What does this tell us about how church leadership functions internally, and what does this portend for COGIC's Future as a global organization that millions of people trust. The historical significance of these incidents heightens the intensity. Koji has long taken pride in its moral leadership, community service, and spiritual harmony. That basis might be shaken by a public court struggle, which would raise serious questions within the religious community in addition to legal scrutiny. Speculation has exploded on social media. Leaders around the nation are keeping a careful eye on the situation because they know that the verdict in this lawsuit could completely change how church authority is perceived and used. Insiders have spoken about hidden histories. However, even as the case progresses, important elements are still unknown. What specifically led to the filing at this time? Were there unsuccessful attempts at private resolution? Are there any additional people involved whose identities haven't come to light yet? These unresolved issues are keeping the religious community on edge, anticipating what will happen next in a story that resembles a high-stakes thriller rather than a normal church conflict. However, the accusations themselves are hardly the most startling part of this chapter. It is their human backstory. Leaders who previously collaborated to lead millions of people are now engaged in a court dispute that puts friendships, allegiances, and faith itself to the test. How did this happen? And what is necessary for COGIC to come out stronger on the other side of this dispute? Or will this public conflict between trust and authority mark it for all time? In the following chapter, the solutions start to become clear when we look at the immediate fallout, the responses of churchgoers, and the wider ramifications for COGIC's future, leadership, and trust. For the denomination and the people who have relied on its leaders for spiritual direction for generations, what comes next might be a game changer. Following the lawsuit's announcement, the Church of God in Christ experienced a never-before-seen surge of responses. Members of the larger religious community, including pastors and congregations, were taken aback, perplexed, and in certain situations, split. For many years, COGIC was seen as a symbol of harmony and spiritual direction. However, tensions that many had suspected but never completely comprehended were revealed by this public judicial battle. Social media exploded very immediately. Online videos of contentious discussions in local congregations, featuring members debating the lawsuit's ramifications in real time, went viral. Others applauded Bishop J. Drew's bravery in facing accusations of wrongdoing and standing up for the church's principles. Others praised Moses Tyson's decades of service and cautioned against public arguments that would cause the denomination to fall apart. The division demonstrated the extent to which this disagreement affected the entire town. Nationwide, religious leaders also provided their opinions. Some provided hesitant support, highlighting the significance of careful investigation of the claims and due process. Others objected to the dispute's public nature, cautioning that improper complaints in court could jeopardize the church's standing as well as the members' spiritual health. The argument expanded beyond the law. It turned into a discussion about responsibility, leadership, and the duties of people tasked with directing millions of souls. Reactions within the church were just as complicated. During services, there was reportedly tension in congregations in strategic areas as members tried to balance their faith with the drama that was developing. The challenge for long-serving pastors and elders is to stay united while juggling loyalty, personal beliefs, and the increasing uncertainty about the church's future. Many were torn between supporting leaders they had looked up to for decades and being worried about accusations that went right to the core of openness and trust. Legal experts started examining the matter in previously unheard-of detail. In the meantime, they pointed out that because church governance, faith-based authority, and organizational practices intersect in ways that the general public rarely observes, litigation against significant religious institutions are uncommon and frequently complicated. Debates over how religious organizations should strike a balance between spiritual authority and accountability were sparked by issues pertaining to fiduciary responsibility, internal oversight, and procedural compliance. The fallout has been severe for Bishop Sheard. Proponents commend him for acting swiftly, seeing the lawsuit as an essential measure to safeguard COGIC's integrity. However, detractors raise concerns about the conflict's public character, timing, and whether the fight could have been settled internally. Moses Tyson is under just as much scrutiny, with some criticizing his earlier choices that are said to have contributed to the current situation and others praising his decades of commitment. The repercussions go much beyond the individuals who are directly affected. The lawsuit has spurred conversations about the duties of leaders, the value of openness, and the necessity of member accountability in religious institutions, in seminaries, church leadership conferences, and faith-based media sources. It poses challenging queries. When internal conflicts are made public, how much should members of the congregation trust its leaders? How can ethical duty and spiritual authority coexist? And when divisions arise at the highest levels, how can religion communities mend? The possible long-term effects on the church's membership and reputation are much more worrisome. Emerging pastors and young leaders are closely observing, taking notes on leadership under criticism, loyalty, and authority. Members may wonder which leaders they follow, which rules are routinely upheld, and whether the church's public persona really represents its inner workings. This legal dispute is about much more than just money or government because of the high emotional and spiritual consequences. It concerns legacy, trust, and the future of a worldwide religious organization. Nevertheless, one thing is evident in spite of the chaos. The matter is far from resolved. Every step of the court process, which might take months or even years, will have an impact on church decisions, alliances, and attitudes. For both participants and onlookers, the tension is nearly intolerable. How will this court case end? Will it strengthen COGIC's divides or restore faith in the leadership? What can the world's religious community learn from this unique struggle? Perhaps most importantly,